picture the day Jesus died on the cross. The sky darkens, the earth shakes, and suddenly, amazing things start happening in Jerusalem. These aren't just old stories, they're real events that changed the world forever. Today, we're going to explore together the 5 most important events that happened right after Jesus took his last breath. Each of these moments is like a piece of a giant puzzle, helping us understand better why Jesus' death was so special. Have you ever wondered why the temple curtain tore in two? Or why some people who were dead came back to life? These are just 2 of the surprising things we're going to uncover. Whether you've heard these stories before or this is all new to you, I promise you'll learn something today. These events aren't just interesting, they might change how you see the world and your own life. So, get ready for a fascinating journey. We're about to unravel the mysteries behind these world-shaking moments. By the end of this video, you'll see the story of Jesus' crucifixion in a whole new light. Are you ready to discover truths that could transform your faith and your understanding of history? Let's start this amazing journey together. As Jesus breathed his last on the cross, an extraordinary event occurred in the heart of Jerusalem. The Gospel of Matthew tells us, at that moment the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. This seemingly simple statement holds profound significance, both historically and spiritually. Let's dive deep into this miraculous event and uncover its rich meaning. Imagine standing in the bustling city of Jerusalem, the air thick with the scent of incense and the murmur of prayers. The temple, a magnificent structure of gleaming white stone and gold, dominates the skyline. At its heart hangs a massive curtain, as tall as a 4-story building and as thick as the palm of your hand. This isn't just any ordinary piece of fabric. The Jewish historian Josephus describes it as a Babylonian tapestry, woven from fine linen and expensive dyed wool, adorned with intricate embroidery depicting the heavens. This veil hung in the Jerusalem temple, separating the holy place from the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies was considered the earthly dwelling place of God's presence. It was so sacred that only the high priest could enter, and only once a year on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. This veil served as a physical and symbolic barrier between God and man, a constant reminder of the separation caused by sin. Now, picture the shock and awe of the priests serving in the temple when they witnessed this impenetrable curtain suddenly split in two from top to bottom. The timing of this event is crucial. It happened at the exact moment of Jesus' death. This wasn't a mere coincidence, it was a divine act with deep theological implications. The significance of this event cannot be overstated. For centuries, the veil represented the separation between a holy God and sinful humanity. Only the high priest could approach God's presence, and even then, only once a year with elaborate purification rituals and sacrifices. The common people were kept at a distance, relying on the priesthood to mediate their relationship with God. But when Jesus died, this system changed dramatically. The author of Hebrews explains it beautifully. Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain, that is, his body, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with the full assurance that faith brings. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 19 through 22. In other words, Jesus' death on the cross tore down the barrier between God and humanity. No longer do we need a human priest to mediate for us. Jesus became our great high priest, offering himself as the perfect sacrifice once and for all. This event also signifies the end of the Old Covenant and the beginning of the New Covenant prophesied by Jeremiah. Under the Old Covenant, people approached God through rituals, sacrifices, and the priesthood. The New Covenant, established by Jesus' death, allows for a direct, personal relationship with God. The tearing of the veil from top to bottom is significant too. It wasn't torn by human hands from the bottom up, but by divine intervention from the top down. This detail emphasizes that it was God's action, not man's, that removed the barrier. It's as if God himself reached down and ripped the curtain apart, declaring, "The way is now open." Consider the impact this event had on the religious practices of the time. For the Jewish people, especially the priests, this would have been earth-shattering. The temple and its rituals were at the center of Jewish religious life. The sudden destruction of the veil would have thrown their entire system into question. Imagine being a priest serving in the temple that day. You've spent your entire life learning the intricate details of temple service, the importance of the veil, and the sacredness of the Holy of Holies. Suddenly, in one moment, everything changes. The veil is torn, exposing the most holy place. How would you react? What would this mean for your faith and your role as a mediator between God and the people? For many, this event, combined with the other miraculous occurrences surrounding Jesus' death, led to a profound shift in understanding. The centurion at the cross, witnessing these events, declared, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Mark chapter 15, verse 39. However, it's important to note that not everyone immediately understood or accepted the implications of this event. Many continued to practice temple worship until the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. This reminds us that paradigm shifts in faith often take time and reflection. It's a testament to the patience and grace of God, who allows us time to process and understand the profound changes He initiates. The tearing of the veil also has implications for how we understand our relationship with God today. It invites us to approach God with confidence, knowing that Jesus has made a way for us. It challenges us to reconsider any veils we might put up in our own lives, traditions, rituals, or beliefs that we think we need to approach God. Moreover, this event underscores the completeness of Jesus' sacrifice. In the Old Testament system, sacrifices had to be made repeatedly. But Jesus' death was the ultimate, once-for-all sacrifice. As the book of Hebrews puts it, day after day every priest stands and performs his religious duties. Again and again he offers the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But when this priest, Jesus, had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 11 through 12. The tearing of the veil also points to the universality of access to God. In the Old Testament system, only Israelites, and specifically priests, could approach God in the temple. But Jesus' death opened the way for all people, regardless of ethnicity or social status, to come to God. This aligns with Jesus' words in John chapter 14, verse 6, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." This democratization of access to God was revolutionary. It meant that every believer, regardless of their background, education, or social status, could have a personal relationship with God. No longer was spiritual connection the exclusive domain of a priestly class. This shift had profound implications for the spread of the early Christian faith, as it meant that the message of Jesus could be embraced by anyone, anywhere. The tearing of the veil also symbolizes the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies and types. The temple, with its various chambers and the veil, was designed to be a picture of heavenly realities. The book of Hebrews tells us that these were copies of the heavenly things, Hebrews chapter 9, verse 23. The tearing of the veil signaled that the reality to which these copies pointed had arrived in the person and work of Jesus Christ. Furthermore, this event connects with other significant moments in biblical history. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments, his face shone so brightly with the glory of God that he had to wear a veil. Paul, in 2 Corinthians, draws a parallel between this veil and the spiritual blindness that prevents people from recognizing Christ. The tearing of the temple veil, then, can be seen as God removing the veil of spiritual blindness, allowing people to see and understand His plan of salvation clearly. The timing of the veil's tearing is also significant. It occurred at the moment of Jesus' death, which was during the time of the evening sacrifice in the temple. This timing underscores that Jesus' death was the ultimate sacrifice, rendering the temple sacrifices obsolete. It's as if God was saying, "The true lamb has been slain. No more animal sacrifices are needed." As we reflect on this event, it's worth considering its relevance to our lives today. How does the tearing of the veil change how we approach God? Do we truly live in the reality of direct access to God, or do we sometimes act as if there's still a barrier? This event challenges us to live boldly in our relationship with God. It invites us to approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16, it reminds us that we don't need to go through human intermediaries or complex rituals to reach God. Jesus has made the way. At the same time, the tearing of the veil doesn't diminish God's holiness. Rather, it magnifies the incredible grace of God, who made a way for unholy people to approach a holy God. It should fill us with awe and gratitude, spurring us to live lives worthy of this incredible gift. The torn veil also speaks to God's desire for intimacy with His people. In the Old Testament, God's presence was hidden behind the veil, accessible only to a select few. But through Christ, God has made Himself knowable and approachable. This doesn't mean that God has become less holy or awesome, but rather that He has made a way for us to be made holy through Christ, enabling us to draw near to Him. This event also has implications for our understanding of worship. In the Old Testament, worship was centralized at the temple. But Jesus told the Samaritan woman at the well that a time was coming when true worshipers would worship in spirit and in truth, John chapter 4, verse 23. The tearing of the veil signaled the beginning of this new era of worship, where God's presence is not confined to a physical building but is accessible wherever believers gather. Moreover, the torn veil speaks to the nature of God's revelation. In the Old Testament, God's will was often communicated through the complex system of temple rituals and sacrifices. But in Christ, God has revealed Himself fully and clearly. As the author of Hebrews puts it, in the past God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways, but in these last days He has spoken to us by His Son, Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 through 2. The tearing of the veil also has eschatological implications. In the book of Revelation, John describes a vision of the New Jerusalem where there is no temple, because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple, Revelation chapter 21, verse 22. The tearing of the earthly temple veil foreshadows this ultimate reality, where God's presence will be fully and freely accessible to His people. As we conclude our exploration of this first crucial event, let's take a moment to marvel at its significance. In one dramatic moment, centuries of religious tradition were transformed. The barrier between God and humanity was torn down, not by human effort, but by divine action. This event set the stage for a new era in God's relationship with humanity, an era we're still living in today. As we marvel at the profound significance of the temple veil being torn, we're reminded that this was just the beginning of a series of extraordinary events. The very earth itself seemed to respond to the magnitude of what was happening. For as the veil was split in two, the ground beneath Jerusalem began to shake. As the temple veil tore from top to bottom, the ground beneath Jerusalem began to tremble. Matthew's Gospel tells us, the earth shook, the rock split. This wasn't just a minor tremor, but a significant seismic event that left its mark on both the landscape and the witnesses. Let's delve deeper into this extraordinary occurrence and uncover its profound implications. Imagine standing in Jerusalem at that moment. The air is thick with tension following Jesus' crucifixion. Suddenly, the ground beneath your feet starts to move. Buildings sway, stones clatter, and a deep rumbling fills the air. It's as if the very planet is reacting to the death of its creator. The once solid earth becomes a rolling sea of stone and dust, challenging everything you thought you knew about the stability of the world around you. But why an earthquake? What's the significance of this geological event coinciding with Jesus' death? To understand this, we need to dive into both the scientific and spiritual implications of earthquakes in the ancient world. Did you know that Israel sits on the Dead Sea Transform Fault System? This major fault line runs from the Red Sea in the south to Turkey in the north, making the region prone to seismic activity. It's part of the larger tectonic boundary between the African plate and the Arabian plate. This geological setting has shaped the landscape of Israel for millions of years, creating features like the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea. However, this particular earthquake was far from ordinary. Its timing and intensity set it apart from typical seismic activity in the region. It's as if the earth itself was bearing witness to the cosmic significance of the events unfolding on Golgotha. In the ancient Near East, earthquakes were often seen as divine messages or judgments. The Old Testament frequently describes God's power in terms of shaking the earth. For instance, in Psalm 18, David sings, "The earth trembled and quaked, and the foundations of the mountains shook. They trembled because he was angry." This imagery of God's power manifesting through earthly tremors is a recurring theme throughout biblical literature. Interestingly, this wasn't the only earthquake associated with Jesus. Matthew's Gospel also records an earthquake at the moment of Jesus' resurrection. It's as if the earth itself was marking the pivotal moments of Jesus' redemptive work. This bookending of Jesus' death and resurrection with seismic activity creates a powerful narrative arc, emphasizing the earth-shattering nature of these events. But let's consider the practical effects of this earthquake. The text tells us that the rock split. This likely refers to the limestone bedrock common in Jerusalem. When limestone fractures, it often does so along straight lines, creating dramatic chasms and rock falls. This phenomenon, known as jointing, can create spectacular formations in limestone landscapes. Here's a fascinating tidbit. Geologists have found evidence of a significant earthquake in the Jerusalem area dated to around 31 AD, which aligns closely with the estimated year of Jesus' crucifixion. While we can't definitively link this geological evidence to the biblical account, it does add an intriguing layer to our understanding. This evidence comes from studying layers of sediment in the Dead Sea, which record seismic activity in the region over thousands of years. The earthquake would have had immediate and lasting impacts on Jerusalem. Buildings may have been damaged, roads disrupted, and water sources affected. In a city built largely of stone, the aftermath would have been visible for years, serving as a constant reminder of that fateful day. Ancient structures like the temple and the city walls would have been particularly vulnerable to seismic activity. But the earthquake's impact wasn't just physical. Consider the psychological effect on the witnesses. They had just seen a man crucified who claimed to be the Son of God. As he died, darkness fell over the land. And now, the earth itself was shaking. How would you process these events if you were there? The combination of visual, auditory, and tactile experiences would have created an overwhelming sensory impact, likely leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. For many, this confluence of events was too powerful to ignore. The Roman centurion and his men, hardened soldiers accustomed to executions, were terrified by what they saw. Matthew records their reaction. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified, and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." This acknowledgement from Roman soldiers, representatives of the empire that had just executed Jesus, adds a powerful irony to the scene. This earthquake also connects to a broader biblical theme of creation responding to its creator. In the book of Romans, Paul writes that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. The earthquake at Jesus' death could be seen as the ultimate expression of this cosmic groaning. It's as if the non-human creation, unable to express itself in words, was crying out in the only way it could. Here's another intriguing detail. In the ancient world, earthquakes were sometimes associated with the deaths of great leaders or the fall of empires. The Roman historian Tacitus recorded earthquakes coinciding with the death of Julius Caesar. The Greek writer Phlegon of Tralles, writing in the 2nd century AD, mentioned a great darkness and an earthquake occurring during the reign of Tiberius Caesar, which some scholars have linked to the events surrounding Jesus' crucifixion. The earthquake at Jesus' death, then, might have been seen by some as a divine acknowledgement of Jesus' kingship, a cosmic coronation of sorts. But the earthquake's significance goes beyond mere symbolism. It had a very practical effect that ties into our next extraordinary event. The shaking earth and splitting rocks led to something even more astonishing. Tombs were opened, and the dead began to rise. But before we delve into that mind-bending occurrence, let's explore a few more aspects of this seismic event. The timing of the earthquake is particularly significant. It occurred at the moment of Jesus' death, which would have been around 3 p.m. according to the Gospel accounts. This was the time of the evening sacrifice in the temple. The earthquake, then, could be seen as a divine interruption of the temple rituals, perhaps signaling the end of the old sacrificial system now that the ultimate sacrifice had been made. Moreover, earthquakes in the Bible are often associated with theophanies, manifestations of God's presence. Think of Mount Sinai shaking when God gave the law to Moses, or Elijah experiencing God's presence not in the wind or fire, but in the still small voice that followed an earthquake. The earthquake at Jesus' death, then, could be understood as a sign of God's presence at this pivotal moment in salvation history. The earthquake would have affected not just Jerusalem, but the surrounding areas as well. The Jordan Valley, with its softer sedimentary rocks, would have been particularly susceptible to landslides and soil liquefaction. The Dead Sea, already a unique geological feature, might have experienced seiche waves, standing waves in an enclosed body of water caused by seismic activity. Interestingly, earthquakes can sometimes cause temporary changes in groundwater systems. Springs might dry up or appear in new locations. Given the importance of water sources in the arid climate of Judea, any such changes would have been noteworthy and potentially seen as portentous. The splitting of rocks mentioned in Matthew's account is particularly intriguing. In addition to the dramatic visual effect, this would have exposed fresh rock surfaces. In limestone areas, this often reveals fossils hidden within the rock. Imagine the wonder and speculation this might have caused among the witnesses. What might they have thought upon seeing the impressions of ancient sea creatures in the newly exposed rock faces? From a symbolic perspective, the splitting of rocks echoes the Old Testament image of God as the Rock of Israel. The prophet Isaiah speaks of God breaking in pieces the rock as a metaphor for divine judgment. The rock splitting at Jesus' death could be seen as a powerful visual representation of the old order being broken apart to make way for the new covenant. The earthquake would have had economic implications as well. Jerusalem's economy was closely tied to the temple and the pilgrimage trade. Any damage to the city's infrastructure could have had long-lasting effects on trade and commerce. This economic disruption might have contributed to the social tensions that eventually led to the Jewish revolt against Rome in 66 AD. For the early Christian community, the earthquake would have served as a powerful apologetic tool. It provided a publicly verifiable event that coincided with Jesus' death, lending credence to their claims about his divine nature and the cosmic significance of his crucifixion. The earthquake might also have had implications for the burial of Jesus. The Gospel accounts tell us that Jesus was buried in a new tomb hewn out of rock. The seismic activity could have affected the stability of such rock-cut tombs, perhaps necessitating quick action in the burial process. As we consider this extraordinary event, it's worth reflecting on how it challenges our understanding of the natural and supernatural. The earthquake, a natural phenomenon, is presented in the Gospels as a divine sign. This interplay between the natural and the supernatural is a recurring theme in the Bible, inviting us to see the hand of God at work in the world around us. The earthquake at Jesus' death also foreshadows the cosmic upheaval described in biblical prophecies about the end times. The book of Revelation, for instance, describes a great earthquake as part of the events leading up to the final judgment. The earthquake at the crucifixion, then, could be seen as a foretaste of this future cosmic shaking. As the ground shook and the rock split, ancient tombs carved into the limestone around Jerusalem were broken open. But what happened next defies natural explanation and leads us into one of the most mysterious and awe-inspiring events surrounding Jesus' death. The earth's shaking was just the beginning. As the dust settled and the people of Jerusalem caught their breath, they were about to witness something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about life and death. As the earth trembled and the rock split, an even more astonishing event unfolded in Jerusalem. Matthew's Gospel tells us, the tombs broke open and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs, and after Jesus' resurrection they went into the holy city and appeared to many people. This extraordinary occurrence, often overlooked in discussions of Jesus' crucifixion, deserves our careful attention. Imagine the scene: the ground is still shaking from the earthquake. Dust fills the air, and people are trying to regain their footing. Suddenly, figures emerge from the tombs surrounding the city. These aren't shambling corpses or ghostly apparitions, but fully restored individuals, recognized as holy people who had died. The very boundary between life and death seems to have been shattered. This event challenges our understanding of reality and raises numerous questions. Who were these resurrected saints? How long had they been dead? What was the purpose of their resurrection? To grasp the significance of this occurrence, we need to delve into both its historical context and its theological implications. First, let's consider the timing. Matthew's account suggests that while the tombs opened at Jesus' death, the actual resurrection of the saints occurred after Jesus' own resurrection. This timing is crucial, as it underscores Jesus' primacy. As the Apostle Paul would later write, Christ is the firstfruits of those who have fallen asleep, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 20. But who were these resurrected saints? The text doesn't provide specific names, leaving room for speculation. Some early Christian writers suggested they might have included Old Testament figures like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Others proposed more recent holy individuals, perhaps those who had been waiting for the Messiah, like Simeon or Anna from Luke's Gospel. The fact that they were recognized when they appeared in the city suggests they were people who had died relatively recently, within living memory of Jerusalem's inhabitants. This recognition adds a personal, emotional dimension to the event. Imagine encountering a deceased loved one, fully alive and restored. The purpose of this mass resurrection is not explicitly stated, but we can draw some inferences. It served as a powerful sign, confirming Jesus' identity and the efficacy of his sacrificial death. It also provided a foretaste of the general resurrection promised at the end of time. In a sense, these resurrected saints were like the firstfruits of the harvest to come. Theologically, this event connects to several important themes in Scripture. It echoes Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of Dry Bones, where God promises to open graves and restore life to his people, Ezekiel chapter 37. It also foreshadows the resurrection of the dead mentioned in the Apostles' Creed, a fundamental belief of Christian faith. The resurrection of the saints also demonstrates the far-reaching effects of Jesus' death and resurrection. Not only did Christ's sacrifice atone for sin, but it also broke the power of death itself. As the prophet Isaiah had foretold, he will swallow up death forever, Isaiah chapter 25, verse 8. Now, let's consider the impact this event would have had on witnesses. Jerusalem during Passover was crowded with pilgrims from all over the Jewish world. News of people rising from the dead would have spread rapidly, causing a sensation. It would have been the talk of every household, marketplace, and synagogue. For some, this event would have been a source of joy and hope. Seeing deceased loved ones alive again would have been an emotional and spiritual experience beyond compare. For others, it might have been unsettling or even frightening. The boundaries between life and death, which seemed so fixed and certain, had suddenly become permeable. The appearance of these resurrected saints in Jerusalem would have created a stir among the religious authorities as well. The Sadducees, who didn't believe in resurrection, would have found their theological position directly challenged. The Pharisees, who did believe in a future resurrection, would have been forced to grapple with this unexpected, present-tense fulfillment of their beliefs. Interestingly, this event is only recorded in Matthew's Gospel. Why didn't the other Gospel writers mention it? This singular account has led to much scholarly discussion. Some suggest that Matthew, writing primarily for a Jewish audience, included this detail because it resonated particularly with Jewish messianic expectations. The silence of other historical sources about this event has also been a point of debate. However, it's worth noting that even in our age of mass communication, extraordinary claims often meet with skepticism. In the ancient world, news of such an event might have been dismissed as rumor or legend by those not directly involved. From a broader perspective, the resurrection of the saints serves as a powerful symbol of the new era inaugurated by Jesus' death and resurrection. The old order, where death had the final word, was giving way to a new reality where death's power was broken. This event was a dramatic enactment of Jesus' words, "I am the resurrection and the life," John chapter 11, verse 25. But what happened to these resurrected saints? The Bible doesn't tell us. Did they die again? Were they taken up to heaven like Elijah? Their fate remains a mystery, perhaps intentionally so. The focus is not on their individual stories, but on what their resurrection signified about Jesus and God's unfolding plan. This event also raises intriguing questions about the nature of resurrection bodies. The fact that these saints were recognized suggests they weren't ghostly apparitions, but had physical forms. This aligns with later New Testament teachings about the resurrection body, described by Paul as spiritual, yet also tangible and recognizable, 1 Corinthians chapter 15. The resurrection of the saints also connects to the Jewish concept of the age to come. Many Jews in Jesus' time believed that the arrival of the Messiah would inaugurate a new age, including the resurrection of the dead. This event, then, could be seen as a sign that this new age was breaking into the present. For the early Christian community, this event would have served as a powerful apologetic tool. It provided additional eyewitness testimony to the reality of resurrection, beyond Jesus' own rising from the dead. When the apostles preached about the resurrection, they could point not only to Jesus but also to these other resurrected individuals who had been seen by many in Jerusalem. The appearance of the resurrected saints in the Holy City, Jerusalem, is significant. Jerusalem held a central place in Jewish theology and eschatology. Many believed that the final resurrection would begin in Jerusalem. This event, then, aligned with and fulfilled these expectations, while also transforming them in light of Jesus' messianic role. As we reflect on this extraordinary event, it's worth considering its implications for our understanding of life, death, and what lies beyond. The resurrection of the saints challenges us to expand our view of what's possible. It invites us to hope in the face of death and to trust in God's power to bring life out of death. Moreover, this event underscores the corporate nature of salvation in biblical thought. It wasn't just Jesus who rose, but a community of saints. This points to the New Testament's emphasis on the church as the body of Christ and the communal aspect of our future hope. The resurrection of the saints also highlights the continuity and discontinuity between our present life and the promised resurrection life. These saints were recognized, suggesting continuity with their former selves. Yet they were also clearly transformed, having overcome death. This gives us a glimpse of what Paul means when he talks about our lowly bodies being transformed to be like Christ's glorious body, Philippians chapter 3, verse 21. As the resurrected saints walked the streets of Jerusalem, they served as living testimonies to the power and promises of God. Their presence proclaimed that the long-awaited day of resurrection had begun to dawn. The age to come was breaking into the present age, turning the world upside down and offering a foretaste of the full renewal yet to come. This event, as astounding as it was just one part of the cosmic drama unfolding on that fateful day. As the resurrected saints appeared to many in Jerusalem, other signs and wonders continued to manifest. The darkness that had fallen over the land persisted, adding to the sense that something unprecedented was taking place. As the resurrected saints emerged from their tombs, another extraordinary phenomenon was unfolding. The Gospels tell us that darkness fell over the land during Jesus' crucifixion. Mark's account states, "At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, Mark chapter 15, verse 33. This eerie darkness, lasting for 3 hours during what should have been the brightest part of the day, adds another layer of mystery and significance to the events surrounding Jesus' death. Imagine yourself in Jerusalem on that day. The sun is high in the sky, its heat beating down on the crowded city. Suddenly, the light begins to fade. Within minutes, an unnatural darkness descends, as if night has fallen at midday. The bustling streets grow quiet as people look to the sky in confusion and fear. What could this mean? To fully appreciate the impact of this event, we need to consider both its historical context and its potential explanations, as well as its profound symbolic and theological significance. First, let's address the elephant in the room. What could have caused this darkness? Over the centuries, various explanations have been proposed, both natural and supernatural. One natural explanation that's often suggested is a solar eclipse. However, this theory faces significant challenges. Passover, when Jesus was crucified, always occurs during a full moon. Solar eclipses, on the other hand, can only occur during a new moon. Moreover, total solar eclipses typically last for a few minutes, not 3 hours. Another natural phenomenon that's been proposed is a khamsin, a hot, sandy wind storm common in the Middle East. These storms can sometimes block out the sun, creating a darkness-like effect. However, the Gospel accounts don't mention any wind or sand, and khamsins don't typically last for precisely 3 hours. Some scholars have suggested that unusually thick storm clouds could have caused the darkness. While this is possible, it would have been an exceptionally severe and localized storm to create darkness over the whole land for exactly 3 hours. Given these challenges to natural explanations, many have concluded that the darkness was a supernatural event, a divine intervention to mark the cosmic significance of Jesus' death. This aligns with how darkness is often used symbolically in the Bible. In the Old Testament, darkness is frequently associated with divine judgment. During the plagues in Egypt, for instance, God sent a darkness that can be felt over the land, Exodus chapter 10, verse 21. The prophet Amos warned of a day when God would make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight, Amos chapter 8, verse 9, a prophecy that some see as being fulfilled in the darkness at Jesus' crucifixion. Interestingly, there are extra-biblical references to this darkness. The early Christian writer Tertullian, in his Apologeticum, challenges his readers to look up the event in Roman archives. The 2nd century historian Thallus also reportedly mentioned the darkness, attempting to explain it as an eclipse, though his original work is lost, and we only know of it through later writers. Perhaps the most intriguing extra-biblical reference comes from Phlegon of Tralles, a 2nd century Greek author. Writing around 137 AD, Phlegon reportedly mentioned a great darkness and an earthquake occurring during the reign of Tiberius Caesar. While he doesn't connect it directly to Jesus' crucifixion, the timing aligns intriguingly with the Gospel accounts. But beyond the question of its cause, what did this darkness mean? What was its significance to those who witnessed it, and what does it symbolize theologically? For the people of Jerusalem, the sudden onset of darkness would have been terrifying. In the ancient world, unusual celestial events were often seen as omens or divine messages. This unexpected darkness, coinciding with the execution of a man who claimed to be the Messiah, would have been seen as deeply portentous. For Jesus' followers, the darkness might have recalled his words about the outer darkness associated with judgment. Was God judging the world for rejecting his Son? Or was this darkness a sign of God's grief, as if creation itself was mourning its Creator? Theologically, the darkness carries rich symbolic meaning. In John's Gospel, Jesus is presented as the light of the world, John chapter 8, verse 12. The darkness at his crucifixion could be seen as a visual representation of the light of the world being extinguished. Yet, as John's Gospel also reminds us, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it, John chapter 1, verse 5. The darkness also symbolizes the spiritual battle taking place. As Jesus hung on the cross, bearing the sins of the world, he experienced separation from the Father. Later, he would cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew chapter 27, verse 46. The physical darkness mirrored this spiritual darkness, this moment when sin and death seemed to have triumphed. Yet, paradoxically, this moment of apparent defeat was actually the moment of victory. In the darkness, as it appeared that all was lost, Jesus was accomplishing his mission, defeating the powers of sin and death. As Paul would later write, God was disarming the powers and authorities, making a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. Colossians chapter 2, verse 15. The darkness at the crucifixion also connects to the theme of revelation and hiddenness in Jesus' ministry. Throughout his life, Jesus often told people to keep his identity secret, a phenomenon scholars call the messianic secret. At the cross, as Jesus fully reveals his identity and mission, darkness descends, as if to shield this most sacred moment from prying eyes. It's worth noting that darkness plays a significant role in other key moments of biblical history. God appeared to Abraham in thick darkness to make his covenant, Genesis chapter 15. At Mount Sinai, God descended in a thick cloud to give the law, Exodus chapter 19. Now, at the cross, darkness again accompanies a pivotal moment in God's dealings with humanity. The 3-hour duration of the darkness is also significant. In the Bible, the number 3 often signifies completeness or divine action. The 3 hours of darkness could symbolize the completeness of Jesus' sacrifice, or the fullness of God's action in reconciling the world to himself. For the Roman soldiers and others present at the crucifixion, the darkness would have added to the sense that something unprecedented was occurring. Combined with Jesus' demeanor on the cross and his final words, it likely contributed to the centurion's declaration, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Mark chapter 15, verse 39. The darkness also serves as a powerful metaphor for the human condition. In our moments of deepest suffering, when all seems dark, we can remember that Jesus experienced the ultimate darkness on our behalf. As the hymn writer puts it, "In Christ alone, who took on flesh, fullness of God in helpless babe. This gift of love and righteousness, scorned by the ones he came to save. Till on that cross as Jesus died, the wrath of God was satisfied. For every sin on him was laid, here in the death of Christ I live." Moreover, the darkness at the crucifixion prefigures the darkness of the tomb, where Jesus would lie for 3 days. Just as the darkness over the land gave way to light, so too would the darkness of the tomb give way to the light of resurrection. This pattern of darkness followed by light, death followed by life, becomes a central motif in Christian theology and experience. The darkness also recalls the primordial darkness at the beginning of creation, over which God said, "Let there be light," Genesis chapter 1, verse 3. At the cross, we see a new creation being inaugurated in the midst of darkness. Just as light burst forth at the beginning of creation, so would the light of resurrection burst forth from the darkness of the cross and tomb. For early Christians, the darkness at the crucifixion became a powerful evangelistic tool. It was a public event, witnessed by many, that marked Jesus' death as cosmically significant. When the apostles preached about Jesus, they could point to this sign that accompanied his death, a sign that echoed Old Testament prophecies and demonstrated divine involvement. As we reflect on this extraordinary darkness, we're invited to consider our own experiences of darkness and light. We all face times of darkness in our lives, moments of suffering, doubt, or despair. The darkness at the crucifixion reminds us that God is present and at work even in our darkest moments. Just as the darkness of Good Friday gave way to the light of Easter Sunday, so too can we hope for light to dawn in our lives. The darkness over the land was more than just an eerie phenomenon, it was a multifaceted sign that spoke volumes about the cosmic significance of Jesus' death. It testified to divine judgment, creation's mourning, spiritual warfare, and the hiddenness of God's greatest revelation. It pointed back to God's mighty acts in history and forward to the hope of new creation. As the darkness lifted and light returned to Jerusalem, those present at the cross witnessed Jesus' final moments. But even as his earthly life ebbed away, another astonishing event was about to unfold, one that would reveal the full impact of his sacrifice. As the supernatural darkness began to lift, those gathered at the foot of the cross witnessed Jesus' final moments. In these last breaths, Jesus spoke words that have echoed through history, offering profound insights into his mission, his relationship with the Father, and the meaning of his sacrifice. The Gospels record 7 last sayings of Jesus on the cross, each laden with significance and emotion. Imagine standing there, straining to hear every word from the lips of the dying Messiah. Each phrase, spoken with difficulty through pain and exhaustion, carries weight beyond measure. Let's explore these 7 last sayings, their context, and their enduring impact. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Luke chapter 23, verse 34. Even in his agony, Jesus' first recorded words from the cross are a prayer for forgiveness. This extraordinary display of mercy extends not just to the Roman soldiers carrying out the crucifixion, but to all involved in his condemnation and death. It's a powerful embodiment of Jesus' own teaching to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. This prayer reveals the heart of Jesus' mission, to bring forgiveness and reconciliation between God and humanity. It's a stark contrast to the vengeance one might expect from a wrongly condemned man. Instead, Jesus fulfills Isaiah's prophecy that he would make intercession for the transgressors, Isaiah chapter 53, verse 12. The phrase, "they do not know what they are doing," is particularly poignant. It speaks to the spiritual blindness that Jesus came to heal. As Peter would later preach, "I know that you acted in ignorance, as did your leaders," Acts chapter 3, verse 17. This ignorance doesn't absolve responsibility, but it does open the door for repentance and forgiveness. For those witnessing this moment, Jesus' words must have been shocking. Here was a man, in the midst of the most excruciating form of execution, praying for his executioners. It's a powerful testimony to the transformative power of divine love. "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Luke chapter 23, verse 43. These words were spoken to one of the criminals crucified alongside Jesus. This man, unlike his counterpart, recognized Jesus' innocence and asked to be remembered in Jesus' kingdom. Jesus' response is immediate and assuring. This exchange is a beautiful illustration of salvation by grace through faith. The criminal had no opportunity for good works or religious observances. His simple faith in Jesus was enough. It's a powerful reminder that it's never too late to turn to God, and that salvation is a gift, not something earned. The promise of paradise is significant. This word, of Persian origin, typically referred to a walled garden or park, and was used in the Greek translation of the Old Testament to describe the Garden of Eden. Jesus is essentially promising a restored relationship with God, a return to the perfect communion humanity once enjoyed. For those at the foot of the cross, this exchange would have been astounding. Here was Jesus, seemingly defeated, promising paradise to a dying criminal. It's a vivid demonstration of Jesus' authority, even in his moment of apparent powerlessness. "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." John chapter 19, verses 26 and 27. In this poignant moment, Jesus addresses his mother Mary and the disciple John. Even in his final hours, Jesus shows concern for his mother's welfare, entrusting her care to his beloved disciple. This act reveals Jesus' human nature and his filial love. Despite the weight of his cosmic mission, he doesn't neglect his earthly responsibilities. It's a touching reminder of Jesus' full humanity alongside his divinity. Moreover, this moment has been seen by many as the establishment of a new family, the Church. Just as Mary is given a new son and John a new mother, so too are Jesus' followers united into a new family of faith. For Mary, these words must have been both comforting and heart-wrenching. The prophecy of Simeon that a sword would pierce her soul, Luke chapter 2, verse 35, was being fulfilled before her eyes. my God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew chapter 27, verse 46, Mark chapter 15, verse 34. Perhaps the most haunting of Jesus' sayings from the cross, this cry of dereliction reveals the depths of Jesus' suffering. It's a quote from Psalm 22, a psalm that begins in anguish but ends in triumph. This moment represents the nadir of Jesus' experience on the cross. As he bears the sins of the world, he experiences separation from the Father, a spiritual agony even greater than his physical torment. Theologically, this cry speaks to the cost of our salvation. Jesus, who had enjoyed perfect communion with the Father for all eternity, now experiences the horror of separation so that we might be reconciled to God. For those present, especially Jesus' followers, this cry must have been deeply disturbing. To hear the one they believed to be the Messiah express such abandonment could have shaken their faith to the core. I am thirsty. John chapter 19, verse 28. This brief statement reminds us of Jesus' physical suffering and his true humanity. After hours on the cross, Jesus experiences intense thirst, a common experience of crucifixion victims. John tells us that Jesus said this so that scripture would be fulfilled. This likely refers to Psalm 69, verse 21, "They put gall in my food and gave me vinegar for my thirst." Even in his suffering, Jesus is consciously fulfilling biblical prophecy. This saying also echoes Jesus' words to the Samaritan woman about living water, John chapter 4. The one who offers eternal satisfaction now experiences the most basic human need. It's a powerful picture of how far Jesus was willing to go to secure our salvation. It is finished. John chapter 19, verse 30. This triumphant cry is Jesus' declaration of victory. The Greek word used here, tetelestai, was commonly written on business documents or receipts in the ancient world to indicate that a debt had been paid in full. With this statement, Jesus announces that his mission is complete. The debt of sin has been paid, the work of redemption accomplished. It's not a cry of defeat, but of triumph. This saying would have had profound implications for those who heard it. For his followers, it might have initially sounded like an admission of defeat. Only later would they understand the full import of these words. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Luke chapter 23, verse 46. Jesus' final words are a quote from Psalm 31, verse 5. With these words, Jesus willingly lays down his life, fulfilling his earlier statement that, "No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord," John chapter 10, verse 18. This saying reveals Jesus' trust in the Father, even at the moment of death. It's a model of faith for all believers facing death. It also shows that despite the earlier cry of abandonment, Jesus dies in full communion with the Father. For those witnessing this moment, these words, followed by Jesus' death, would have been the final shock in a day full of astonishing events. The one they had hoped would be the Messiah was dead. The impact of Jesus' last words extends far beyond those who heard them at Calvary. For 2 millennia, believers have found comfort, challenge, and profound theological truth in these sayings. These words have inspired countless works of art, literature, and music. From Bach's Street Matthew Passion to modern worship songs, artists have sought to capture the depth of meaning in Jesus' final utterances. Theologians have pored over these sayings, finding in them insights into the nature of Christ, the meaning of the atonement, and the character of God. The 7 last words have been the subject of innumerable sermons, books, and religious devotions, particularly during Holy Week. For individual believers, these words offer a pattern for life and death. They teach us about forgiveness, assurance of salvation, care for others, honesty before God, physical and spiritual need, triumph over evil, and trust in God. The last words also offer a unique glimpse into Jesus' character. We see his mercy, his authority, his compassion, his anguish, his humanity, his sense of accomplishment, and his filial trust. They reveal both his divine nature and his full humanity. Moreover, these sayings have significant pastoral implications. They offer comfort to the dying, assurance to the doubting, and challenge to the complacent. They remind us that even in our darkest moments, we are not alone, and that victory can come through apparent defeat. The sequence of the sayings also tells a story. From the prayer for forgiveness to the final commitment of his spirit to God, we see a progression that mirrors the Christian journey. It begins with forgiveness, includes struggles and triumphs, and ends in peaceful trust in God. As we reflect on these last words, we're invited to place ourselves in the story. How do we respond to such love, such sacrifice? How do these words challenge and change us? The last words of Jesus on the cross stand as a testament to his character, his mission, and his love. They offer a window into the heart of God and the meaning of the cross. As the echo of these words faded on Calvary, the full impact of what had just occurred was yet to be realized. The earth had shaken, darkness had covered the land, the temple veil had torn, and now the Son of God had breathed his last. But the story was far from over. As Jesus uttered his final words, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit," the pivotal moment in all of human history arrived. The Gospels describe this moment with both simplicity and profound significance. Luke tells us, when he had said this, he breathed his last, Luke chapter 23, verse 46. Matthew adds, and when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit, Matthew chapter 27, verse 50. Imagine standing at the foot of the cross at this moment. The air is thick with tension and sorrow. The crowd, which had been jeering earlier, is now hushed. As Jesus breathes his last, it's as if the whole world holds its breath. Then, in an instant, everything changes. The moment of Jesus' death was accompanied by a series of extraordinary events that underscored its cosmic significance. Let's briefly recap these phenomena. The temple veil torn, Matthew reports, at that moment the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, Matthew chapter 27, verse 51. This massive curtain, separating the holy place from the most holy place, was reportedly 60 feet high, 30 feet wide, and as thick as a man's hand. Its supernatural rending symbolized the new access to God made possible through Jesus' sacrifice. The earth shook, the rocks split, Matthew chapter 27, verse 51. This earthquake was not just a natural phenomenon, but a divine punctuation mark on the significance of what had just occurred. Tombs opened, the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people, Matthew chapter 27, verses 52 and 53. This extraordinary event prefigured the general resurrection and demonstrated Jesus' power over death. Darkness lifted, the supernatural darkness that had covered the land for 3 hours now dissipated, as if creation itself was acknowledging that the work was finished. The impact on those present was immediate and profound. The Gospel writers record several reactions. The centurion's confession, Mark tells us, and when the centurion, who stood there in front of Jesus, saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Mark chapter 15, verse 39. This hardened Roman soldier, who had likely overseen many crucifixions, recognized something utterly unique in Jesus' death. The crowd's response, Luke records, when all the people who had gathered to witness this sight saw what took place, they beat their breasts and went away, Luke chapter 23, verse 48. This gesture of beating the breast was a sign of mourning and contrition, suggesting that many in the crowd realized they had witnessed something momentous and perhaps terrifying. The women's vigil, many women were there, watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs, Matthew chapter 27, verse 55. These faithful women, including Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons, stood as witnesses to Jesus' death, their presence a testament to their devotion. The disciples' despair, although not explicitly described at this moment, we can infer the disciples' state from their subsequent actions. They went into hiding, fearing for their lives and seemingly having lost all hope. Peter, who had boasted of his loyalty, had already denied Jesus 3 times. Joseph of Arimathea's courage, this member of the Sanhedrin, who had not consented to their decision to crucify Jesus, now stepped forward to claim Jesus' body for burial. His action, along with Nicodemus, showed that Jesus' death was already causing some to declare their allegiance openly. The death of Jesus is not just a historical event, but the theological cornerstone of the Christian faith. Its significance is multifaceted and profound. Atonement for sin, at its core, Jesus' death is understood as the ultimate sacrifice for the sins of humanity. As Paul would later write, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. Jesus' death satisfies the demands of divine justice and makes forgiveness possible. Victory over evil, paradoxically, what seemed like defeat was actually the moment of greatest victory. Through his death, Jesus defeated the powers of sin, death, and Satan. As the author of Hebrews puts it, he too shared in their humanity so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14. Reconciliation with God. Jesus' death bridges the chasm between God and humanity caused by sin. Paul explains, "For if, while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life?" Romans chapter 5, verse 10. Fulfillment of prophecy. Jesus' death fulfilled numerous Old Testament prophecies, particularly those found in Isaiah chapter 53. This demonstrates God's sovereign plan working throughout history. Example of self-sacrificial love. Jesus' willingness to die for others sets the ultimate example of love. As he had taught, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. John chapter 15, verse 13. Inauguration of the New Covenant. Jesus had spoken at the Last Supper of a new covenant in my blood. Luke chapter 22, verse 20. His death established this new covenant, fulfilling Jeremiah's prophecy of a time when God would write his law on people's hearts. Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 31 to 34. Demonstration of God's love. The cross stands as the supreme demonstration of God's love for humanity. As John would write, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. 1 John chapter 3, verse 16. The manner of Jesus' death is also significant. Crucifixion was not just a method of execution, but a public spectacle designed to humiliate the victim and deter others from defying Roman authority. By dying in this way, Jesus identified with the lowest and most marginalized in society. He also fulfilled his own teachings about the nature of his kingdom, one that operates not by worldly power, but by sacrificial love. The timing of Jesus' death is noteworthy as well. John's Gospel emphasizes that Jesus died on the day of preparation for the Passover, at the time when the Passover lambs were being slaughtered in the temple. This timing identifies Jesus as the true Passover lamb, whose death brings deliverance from bondage to sin, just as the original Passover marked Israel's deliverance from bondage in Egypt. It's also worth noting the speed of Jesus' death. Victims of crucifixion often lingered for days, but Jesus died after only 6 hours. This unusual quickness fulfilled his own words that no one took his life from him, but he laid it down of his own accord. John chapter 10, verse 18. The death of Jesus had immediate historical consequences as well. It set in motion a chain of events that would lead to the birth of the Christian church. The disciples, once they encountered the risen Christ, would be transformed from fearful fugitives into bold proclaimers of the gospel. The message of Jesus' death and resurrection would spread rapidly throughout the Roman Empire and beyond, reshaping the course of human history. For Jews who accepted Jesus as the Messiah, his death required a radical reinterpretation of their messianic expectations. Instead of a military leader who would overthrow Roman rule, they now saw in Jesus a suffering servant who conquered through sacrifice. This reinterpretation would lead to a new understanding of many Old Testament passages. For Gentiles, the message of Jesus' death offered a new way to approach God, apart from the Jewish law. This would eventually lead to the spread of Christianity as a distinct religion, separate from Judaism. The death of Jesus has continued to impact the world in countless ways. It has inspired great works of art, literature, and music. It has motivated countless acts of charity and self-sacrifice. It has provided comfort to the suffering and hope to the dying. It has challenged the powerful and given voice to the oppressed. On a personal level, the death of Jesus invites each of us to consider our own response. What does it mean for us that the Son of God willingly died in our place? How does this act of love change how we view God, ourselves, and others? As the reality of Jesus' death settled over Jerusalem on that Friday afternoon, few could have imagined what would happen next. The body of Jesus was hastily taken down from the cross and laid in a nearby tomb. His followers, their hopes shattered, retreated into hiding. The religious leaders, thinking they had eliminated a threat, requested a guard for the tomb. But Sunday was coming, and with it, an event that would change everything. As the first light of dawn broke over Jerusalem on that Sunday morning, no one could have anticipated the world-changing discovery that was about to unfold. The body of Jesus had been hastily entombed on Friday evening, and now, as the Sabbath restrictions lifted, a group of women were making their way to the grave to properly anoint the body. Little did they know that they were about to become the first witnesses to the most extraordinary event in human history. The Gospel accounts paint a vivid picture of that momentous morning. Mark tells us, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, Mark chapter 16, verses 1 and 2. Imagine the scene. The women, grief-stricken and exhausted from the events of the past few days, make their way through the quiet streets of Jerusalem. Their minds are preoccupied with practical concerns. Who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? Mark chapter 16, verse 3. They are unprepared for what they are about to encounter. As they approach the tomb, they're met with an astonishing sight. Matthew describes it dramatically. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and, going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. Matthew chapter 28, verses 2 and 3. The women's reaction is one of understandable fear and confusion. But the angel's message is clear and revolutionary. Don't be alarmed, he said. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him, Mark chapter 16, verse 6. This moment, the discovery of the empty tomb, is the spark that ignites the flame of Christian faith. It's a moment that transforms mourning into joy, despair into hope, and defeat into victory. But it's only the beginning of the resurrection story. Over the next 40 days, Jesus would appear to various individuals and groups, providing tangible proof of his resurrection and instructing his followers about the kingdom of God. Let's explore some of these appearances. Mary Magdalene. John's Gospel provides a touching account of Jesus' appearance to Mary Magdalene. Initially mistaking him for the gardener, Mary recognizes Jesus when he calls her by name. This personal encounter transforms Mary from a grieving follower to the first apostle of the resurrection, John chapter 20, verses 11 to 18. The disciples on the road to Emmaus. Luke recounts how Jesus, unrecognized, joins two disciples on their journey to Emmaus. As he explains the scriptures to them, their hearts burn within them, and they finally recognize him in the breaking of bread, Luke chapter 24, verses 13 to 35. The disciples in the upper room. Jesus appears to his disciples, showing them his hands and side as proof of his identity. This appearance is particularly significant as it includes the commissioning of the disciples and the bestowal of the Holy Spirit, John chapter 20, verses 19 to 23. Thomas's encounter. A week later, Jesus appears again, this time specifically addressing Thomas's doubts. This leads to Thomas's profound confession of faith, "My Lord and my God." John chapter 20, verse 28. The appearance by the Sea of Galilee. John chapter 21 describes Jesus' appearance to 7 disciples by the Sea of Galilee, including the miraculous catch of fish and the restoration of Peter. The Great Commission. Matthew records Jesus meeting his disciples on a mountain in Galilee, where he gives them the Great Commission to make disciples of all nations. Matthew chapter 28, verses 16 to 20. The Ascension. Luke, both in his Gospel and in Acts, describes Jesus' final appearance and ascension into heaven, marking the end of his earthly ministry and the beginning of the church age. Luke chapter 24, verses 50 to 53, Acts chapter 1, verses 6 to 11. The impact of these appearances on the disciples and the early Christian community was profound and transformative. Consider the change in the disciples. Before the resurrection, they were hiding in fear, their hopes shattered. Peter, who had boasted of his loyalty, had denied Jesus 3 times. The others had fled at his arrest. They were a defeated and demoralized group. After encountering the risen Christ, these same men and women became fearless proclaimers of the gospel. Peter, once cowed by a servant girl, now boldly preached to thousands in Jerusalem. The disciples, who had abandoned Jesus, now stood firm in the face of persecution and martyrdom. This dramatic transformation is one of the strongest historical evidences for the reality of the resurrection. What could account for such a change, other than the actual, bodily resurrection of Jesus? The resurrection also had an immediate impact on the community in Jerusalem. The book of Acts tells us that within weeks, thousands were joining the nascent Christian movement. The message of the risen Christ spread rapidly, first among Jews and then to Gentiles, eventually reaching the far corners of the Roman Empire. The theological significance of the resurrection cannot be overstated. It is the cornerstone of Christian faith and theology. Let's explore some of its key implications. Validation of Jesus' claims. The resurrection vindicates all of Jesus' claims about his identity and mission. As Paul would later write, Jesus was declared to be the Son of God in power according to the Spirit of holiness by his resurrection from the dead, Romans chapter 1, verse 4. Victory over death. The resurrection demonstrates Jesus' triumph over death, offering hope of eternal life to all who believe. As Jesus himself said, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die," John chapter 11, verse 25. Foundation of Christian hope. The resurrection of Jesus is the basis for the Christian hope of bodily resurrection. Paul argues, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile, you are still in your sins, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 17. Inauguration of new creation. The resurrection of Jesus is seen as the firstfruits of the new creation. It's the beginning of God's work of renewing all things, a process that will culminate in the new heavens and new earth. Empowerment for Christian living. The same power that raised Jesus from the dead is available to believers for holy living. Paul prays that believers might know his incomparably great power for us who believe. That power is the same as the mighty strength he exerted when he raised Christ from the dead, Ephesians chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. Assurance of final judgment. The resurrection of Jesus is presented in the New Testament as a guarantee of final judgment. As Paul told the Athenians, God has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead, Acts chapter 17, verse 31. Model of Christian hope. Just as Jesus was raised bodily from the dead, so Christians hope for a bodily resurrection. The resurrected Christ, bearing the marks of his crucifixion yet gloriously transformed, provides a model for understanding the nature of the resurrection body. The implications of the resurrection extend far beyond theology. They touch every aspect of Christian life and thought. Ethics. The reality of the resurrection provides a foundation for Christian ethics. If Christ is risen, then his teachings and example have divine authority. Worship. The risen Christ becomes the object of Christian worship. The early Christian confession, Jesus is Lord, is grounded in the reality of his resurrection. Mission. The Great Commission, given by the resurrected Christ, becomes the driving force behind Christian mission and evangelism. Suffering. The resurrection provides hope and meaning in the face of suffering. As Paul writes, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us, Romans chapter 8, verse 18. View of history. The resurrection inaugurates a new era in history, shaping the Christian understanding of time and eschatology. View of the body. Against Greek notions of the body as a prison for the soul, the resurrection affirms the goodness of the body and the physical world. The resurrection of Jesus continues to be a subject of intense interest and debate. For believers, it is the central fact of history, the event that changes everything. For skeptics, it remains a stumbling block, a claim that challenges the boundaries of historical investigation. Yet the impact of the resurrection, both in history and in countless individual lives, is undeniable. It has inspired art, music, and literature. It has comforted the grieving and given hope to the dying. It has motivated acts of extraordinary courage and self-sacrifice. It has shaped the course of Western civilization and continues to influence the world today. As we conclude our exploration of the events surrounding Jesus' death and resurrection, we're left with a profound challenge. If Jesus truly rose from the dead, what does this mean for us? How should it shape our understanding of the world, of God, and of our own lives and destinies? The empty tomb and the risen Christ stand as an invitation to faith, to hope, and to a transformed life. As the angel said to the women on that first Easter morning, "He is not here, he has risen." Matthew chapter 28, verse 6. This declaration continues to echo through history, calling each of us to consider its implications and to respond. Throughout this journey, we've explored the extraordinary events surrounding the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. From the earthquake that shook Jerusalem to the temple veil that was torn, from the supernatural darkness that covered the land to the resurrection of the saints, from Jesus' last words on the cross to his glorious resurrection, each event carries profound and lasting significance. These are not mere historical occurrences confined to the past. Their impact continues to reverberate through the centuries, shaping lives, cultures, and the very course of human history. The cross and the empty tomb remain powerful symbols of sacrifice, love, hope, and victory over death. For billions of people worldwide, these events form the core of their faith and worldview. They offer comfort in times of sorrow, strength in moments of weakness, forgiveness for the repentant, and hope for the future. Even for those who don't share the Christian faith, the cultural and historical impact of these events is undeniable. They have inspired some of the greatest works of art, music, and literature. They've influenced legal and ethical systems. They've motivated countless acts of charity and selfless service. As we conclude our exploration, we're invited to reflect on the personal significance of these events. Regardless of our individual beliefs, the questions raised by these occurrences are universal and timeless. What gives meaning to life and death? How should we live in light of our mortality? Is there something worth sacrificing everything for? Is there hope beyond the grave? The story of Jesus' death and resurrection offers profound answers to these questions. It challenges us to consider a perspective that transcends the material and temporal, pointing to eternal realities. May this exploration be not just an intellectual exercise, but a catalyst for personal reflection, spiritual growth, and perhaps, life transformation. For ultimately, the true measure of these events' impact is not found in history books or theological doctrines, but in changed lives and transformed hearts throughout the centuries. As we close, let's remember the words of the angel on that first Easter morning, "He is not here, he has risen." This announcement, which echoed 2 millennia ago, continues to resound today, inviting each of us to discover its meaning in our own lives.